This is Session 2. Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. There is but one true and living God. We'll be starting on page 50 of your workbook. This whole page is pertaining to alcohol and drug ed. And you can simply pass this page out to your clients, your patients, your friends, and just ask them to go through and answer true or false to each one of these questions. And then as you go back through and explain it, and all the explanations for each one of these questions are in your manual in the alcohol and drug ed section. So you'll have the same information that I'm providing here on the whiteboard. Alcohol is a stimulant, true or false? Alcohol is a depressant. It depresses the central nervous system. Ether has a certain formula. Alcohol has a certain formula. Ether and alcohol are real closely related. And ether, is like what they use for anesthesia during an operation. They shut down your body functions, and they shut down your body. It's a depressant. It depresses the central nervous system. I know that, yes, it seems like that alcohol and even opiates another depressant, but it seems like that they are a stimulant, especially at first when you first start using. But over time, it's a downer. And you'll notice people maybe in the bar or in your group, and they've drank too much and they're dozing off. They're sitting there and they're dozing off, and then they have another drink, and then they doze off and they have another drink. It's a downer. Alcohol is a depressant. Number 2, blackout and pass out mean the same thing. Blackout is amnesia. It's the person does not remember what they're doing, where they've been, what they've said. They don't remember anything of what. It can be for 4 hours. It can be for 5 hours. It can be for a day. As long as they keep their blood alcohol content up over 0.20, they're going to remain in a blackout stage, and they're not going to remember what's taken place. Pass out is a comatose. That's they're pass out, and it's important when your children, they come home from a party or being with friends, and they come in and it's obvious that they've been using something you don't know. They may not even know what they use, and they pass out on your couch, or they pass out at the door as soon as they come in the door. This is a medical situation. You need to take them to ER. And they'll say, oh no, I just had a couple drinks, or I just did this, did that. They may not know what they got. They don't know what they were given. It's a medical emergency. Please act on it. Number 3, beer drinkers will not become alcoholics. That's false. 1 can of beer, 12-ounce can of beer, .6% beer, 12 ounces, 1 4 to 6 ounce glass of wine, and 1 jigger of whiskey, you refer to it as a shot of whiskey. A shot of whiskey is 1 ounce, but the bartender will not fill it up to that line. It will fill it up to the brim. Filling up to the brim is 1.5 ounces. 1.5 ounces of whiskey or distilled liquor. But each one of these, whether it's a 12-ounce can of beer, 6-ounce glass of wine, or a 1.5 ounce of distilled liquor, they are all equal to 1 ounce of content of ethyl alcohol. Ethyl alcohol is what the addict is addicted to. Not beer, not wine, not distilled liquor, but ethyl alcohol. So yes, beer drinkers can become alcoholic. One normal size drink, 12-ounce can of beer, 6-ounce glass of wine, 1.5 ounce of liquor. One normal size drink of distilled liquor is approximately equal in alcohol content to 1 12-ounce bottle of 4% beer. That's true. Number 5, alcohol leaves the system at the rate of 1 normal size drink an hour. This is true. For each normal size drink, it raises the blood alcohol content to 0.02. So the first hour, you sit down with your friends after work and you have, say you have 3 within that first hour. You used to have 3 drinks in that first hour. At the end of that first hour, your blood alcohol content, 0.06, but minus 0.02, that your liver burns up. So at the end of the first hour, 0.04. The second hour, you don't start out at 0 like you did the first hour. You start out 0.04. 0.04, and you have 2 more drinks. You're up at 0.08, but minus 0.02, you're at 0.06. The third hour, you start out at 0.06, and you have 1 more drink, and you're at 0.08, which is drunk driving in the state of Indiana and nearly all the states is 0.08 blood alcohol content. If someone comes in and they say, I don't know how they picked me up for DUI because I only had 2 drinks. There is no way. There is no way that they just had 2 drinks unless they weigh 80 pounds or maybe 70 or 80 pounds. But it's not even possible at that, because the bigger the person, yes, the more alcohol it takes to dilute the blood. So, but at 0.08, over time, before it's going to raise the blood alcohol content to enough to be arrested for drunk driving. Alcohol leaves the system. Number 5, the rate of 1 normal-sized drink an hour. That is true. Number 6, there are several ways to speed up the rate at which alcohol leaves the system. No. The liver, the pancreas, it burns up 0.02 an hour. There's no way to speed it up. Number 7, taking a few drinks before going outside is a good way of insulating the body against cold weather. That's false. It really leaves you more open to illnesses having a few drinks. Number 8, given enough time, all heavy drinkers will become alcoholic. I know a lot of us think that's true, but that's not. It's not necessarily true. Those assessments that we went through, someone can be a heavy drinker and their tolerance never increases and they never cross that invisible line into alcoholism. And when they might think that they were alcoholic because they were such heavy drinkers, and then one day they quit, and then they'll say, well, I just quit. I ain't no problem. I just quit. They had never crossed that line to alcoholism. Number 9, 1 drinker out of every 10 will become alcoholic regardless of their social, economical, or professional status. And this is basically true. 1 drinker out of 10 will become an alcoholic. I sat down with about 8 or 10 other soldiers at Fort Knox, Kentucky. They carried me home. Here's your 1 out of 10. That was me. Number 10, all people who drink get drunk occasionally. That's not true. That's false. A lot of people drink sociably and they never get drunk. A lot of women, for example, will have a limit of 1 drink because they're small and they have less blood to pollute, and if they had 2 drinks, they would feel it. And so they have a limit of 1 drink. And the only reason that they drink is because of peer pressure. They're in a situation where other people are drinking, so they feel like they need one too. So that's social drinking. A lot of men have a limit of just 2 drinks, and they never get drunk. Number 11, it is possible to be alcoholic and not know it. Absolutely possible to be alcoholic and not know it. That's the reason I say assessments. We have to have those assessments for someone to recognize their situation the same way that the prodigal son recognized his hunger. And without these assessments, they're never going to recognize it. And you'll see some of these here assessments, they get more personal. Excessive drinking may produce serious physical and mental diseases. True. Number 13, judgment, vision, and reaction time to an individual is frequently impaired by even small amounts of alcohol. A few years ago, I saw a movie put on by the state police, Indiana State Police, and they had about 6 or 8 state policemen come do an obstacle course with their cars, and these cones were set where they had to go in and out and around, and so I think 8 of them, all at first, went through this obstacle course did not hit one cone. They all came into the airport's bar. It was set up out in a little small airport. And they all had one drink. And they drove through this obstacle course again. And a couple of them hit a cone. Now, they eliminated those two. So there were 6 left. Then the 6 left went in and had another drink. And they went back through again. And just a small amount caused them to hit that cone. And it interfered with their reaction time. Number 14, eating before excessive drinking will prevent intoxication. Eating depends on how much you drink. Eating before is not going to eliminate it. It may slow it down a little bit, but the first effects. But if you drink enough following your meal, you're going to become intoxicated. Number 15, black coffee will help a person to sober up. This is not true. One normal sized drink an hour. I don't care what you do, it's not going to speed the process up. Matter of fact, you give someone that's really intoxicated black coffee, only thing you've done, you created a wide awake drunk. And watch out, you've been better off just letting them to sit back over in the corner and snooze. Number 16, when the addict stops using, all their other problems will be solved. That's not true. Number 17, the earlier the condition of drug addiction is detected, the greater the possibilities of recovery. And this is true. And in my work with adolescents at the Indiana Soldiers and Sailors Children's Home, those kids, they were looking out the window, they were laying down on the floor, they were back over in the corner, but they were listening. When I asked them a question, no matter what they were, how much distance they thought that they wanted me to think they were, they got it. And those kids were paying attention. And the earlier that we can reach out to someone, the greater the possibilities of recovery. About 75% of the alcoholics in America are homeless. This is false. About 2 or 3% of the alcoholics in America are homeless. Number 19, one can always spot a chronic drug addict by their bloodshot eyes or thick speech. It can be a range of any kinds of medical conditions that would cause bloodshot eyes and thick speech. Drug addiction is a treatable illness. Drug addiction is a treatable illness. True, absolutely true. 21. Effective treatment will allow the alcoholic to resume social drinking occasionally. That's false. If they've crossed that invisible line into alcoholism, or they've crossed that invisible line into drug addiction, they'll never be able to use alcohol or any other drugs without risking a severe outcome. Number 22, alcohol is not a drug. False, false, false. Alcohol is a drug. It's a drug, it's a drug. I worked with a young man come back from Vietnam. He was on 95% heroin in Nam. He got back here, only thing that was on the street was 5% heroin. He gave up the heroin real quick because he couldn't get anything out of it. He started drinking alcohol. He was worse on alcohol than he ever thought about being on heroin. Alcohol is a drug, it's a drug, it's a drug. 1/3 of the adult population choose not to drink alcohol. True or false? That's true. Actually, about half of the adult population No, I'm sorry, that's false. Here I go. 1/3 of the adult population choose not to drink alcohol. That's false. About 1/2 the adult population choose not to drink alcohol. Number 24, opiate addiction is the largest addicted population in the United States. It's getting more press than anything else, but alcohol addiction is absolutely the largest addicted population world over, no matter where you go. Number 25, total absence from alcohol is the best choice for everyone. I think you'd have a hard time selling that one. Post-acute withdrawal syndrome. All of us struggle with our sin nature, but the unfortunate soul in recovery has to deal with post-acute withdrawal syndrome and a prodigal or exaggerated sin nature. This is page 51 in your workbook. Plus denial, temptation, and a conflicting conscience, and cravings, and a state of mind not always knowing what's right or wrong. Please convey this message. Pause is a normal process of recovery. Or lack of relaxation, accelerated thoughts, unclear thinking, short-term memory loss, lack of coordination, sleep disturbances, inability to focus, indefinable fears. That's an indefinable or undefinable fears. It's a gripping feeling of fear for no apparent reason. More symptoms of pause. Emotionally, they're either an absence or an excess of emotions with a tendency towards hyperreaction. Irritability, sometimes resulting in fits of rage. Always feeling abnormal, but knowing what would make them feel normal. Another drink, another fix, another joint. Often feels that they have a hole in their belly the size of a basketball with a wind blowing through it. There's psychological and physical cravings for months and sometimes years. Severe stress are all symptoms of pause. While the recovering person is struggling with their sin nature and pause, like I said, they are often still dealing with denial of their disease. And there are many family members and friends and co-workers and sometimes even ministers who are eager to minimize their condition and enable them to continue their use or just cut back. Just cut back. That's all you need to do. If they're fortunate to still have a spouse, there's a power struggle at home. The spouse has probably been taking care of the household responsibilities for years. But now the recovering person wants to take it over. So there's a power struggle. Many of these marriages end in divorce after the addict finds recovery. There's consequences even in recovery. Because of continued abuse of drugs and alcohol, the brain needs to make an adjustment to right itself. as neurotransmitters return to normalcy and acclimate to a life without mind-altering chemicals, pause are the brain's way of correcting itself, and it may take months or years, like I said, sometimes even a lifetime. Usually most symptoms are at their peak between 7 and 14 days. Between 7 and 14 days and 6 months, sober and clean. Most of the symptoms will disappear. But during that time, it feels like you're going crazy. You just feel completely insane. The remaining symptoms slowly fade over time, but some may never leave the recovering person completely. You may think, if the recovering person completely gives themselves to the Lord, all their other problems will be solved. Sorry to bust your bubble, but the recovering person must accept the consequences of their past behavior, regardless of their commitment level to the Lord. But remember, this is normal, and please convey that message. What you're feeling is normal to someone that's early recovering. Page 52. The stress created by pause greatly affects the harmony of the recovering addict and their family. The recovering individual and their family needs to understand that the lowering of stress is vital and that specific lifestyle changes need to occur. Healthy habits such as limiting caffeine, getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep, eating 3 balanced meals per day, giving up nicotine, exercise 3 or 4 times a week. These kind of lifestyle changes will reap great benefits. Additionally, meditation and for some, relaxation exercises are recommended and implemented in Christian counseling and addiction services as a part of our scheduled programs. Please, in your counsel with recovering addicts and their families, it's imperative that you convey the message. Pause is a normal process of recovery, and without professional assistance, they will suffer greatly. Addiction terms to research. And please create paper files in a physical filing cabinet as well as on your computer for these different terms. There's several lessons during the alcohol and drug section of this manual, and each of them have 8 or 10 different terms that I ask you to research. You may say, are you serious? You want me to research all these items? You got Google. All you have to do is Google these terms and spend about an hour reading about each one of these different terms to familiarize yourself with this field. When my professor asked me to research all these terms, I had to go to Indianapolis Library, the Indiana Library, the Ball State Library, Muncie Library, Newcastle Library. I had to ask for books to be shipped here and there. You know, you got Google. Research these terms. Prior to going to an Indian reservation in South Dakota, prior to going to India, prior to going to the Philippines, prior to going to Vietnam, I researched all these countries, and I learned about their culture, what kind of illegal drugs were used, their customs, their political ideology, the population of their cities and their country, and whatever else I could learn in advance. So I could express to their people group and their people that their people and their people group were important to me. And preferably the idea that they were important to God. Again, the church would not send missionaries to another country without training them about the people groups where they will be sharing the gospel. We Christians have to earn the right to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. Page 56. I'm not going to try to say that word. THC. They're highlighted in your manual. THC is the addictive and euphoric substance in cannabis. THC clings to the fatty tissues in our body. The brain and our reproductive organs have a tremendous amount of fatty tissue. After use, large quantities of THC may stay in the body for as much as 30 days. The remaining THC in the body may release all at once. The user never knows when this may happen. Many users call this a freebie. It's a freebie. They got high just all of a sudden, don't know why, because THC in their body released. It was a week later after they stopped. They haven't even used any marijuana, but they got a freebie. But this freebie may happen while they are driving a vehicle or operating large equipment. You never know. One joint today is equivalent to 15 or 20 joints of the past. And again, be careful when you're ordering educational material for youth. Often the material will show your youth how to use the substance, and with cannabis, it may even explain how to make much stronger uses of cannabis, such as hash and hashish. I would not want someone showing my children or my grandchildren how to use some mind-altering drug. Facts about marijuana, page 57. Short-term effects, long-term effects, effects on the lung. 5 joints in a week cause more lung damage than 6 packs of cigarettes. Amount of tar in the lung. 5 joints per day equals 2.5 quarts of tar in the lungs. Effects on the heart and blood pressure, effects on the reproductive system, effects on the brain, withdrawal symptoms, and why our states are legalizing it, I never know. But page 58. Now this is where my daughter, she let me know, now if you're a drug addict, you forgot your mathematics. I said, what? I wonder what I did with that. Good thing I brought another one. One plus 1 equals 4. Page 58, top of the page. 1 plus 1 equals 10. 1 plus 1 equals 0. When you mix 2 different types of drugs, alcohol and opiates. Alcohol and opiates, we always believed, oh, yeah, I see, alcohol, opiates. But this younger generation has proved us wrong, because a lot of them are using alcohol and Valium or Vicodin and Oxycontin, and some of them are dying, but not all. But for, I bet, 30 years in the field, our first 30 years at least, we believed us professionals believe that alcohol plus opiates equal death. Because it happens so often. 1 plus 1 equals 10. Alcohol plus Valium or anything equivalent can equal 10. So you have one beer, and you take enough Valium along with it, because Valium is considered, and Xanax are considered dry alcohol. Multiplying effect of 10. You just had 10 beers, an equivalent of 10 beers. And I had people who are in the program that said, I feel like a piker. I only drink 1 or 2 here and there. And get around AA and everybody's, drink a case a day or a fifth a day or whatever. But using Valium or Xanax, and they have effects of 10. The tolerance. Personally, I started out drinking 2 or 3 beers. And I still get the same euphoria as I did later with 4 or 6. My tolerance kept increasing. 6 to 8 beers. And it took 10 to 12. And the same way with Oxycontin. Takes 10 milligrams. Takes 20 milligrams. Takes 30 milligrams. Takes more and more and more. The tolerance keeps increasing. Eventually, reach a peak of, say, like I said, a fifth a day, or a case a day. But then as the body begins to deteriorate, the tolerance curve will start lessening. And those 2 or 3% people I talked about that are on Skid Row, and if they're there because of alcohol, but not everybody that's homeless is there because of alcohol. But those that are, their place where 2 or 3 a day will will get the euphoria that they used to have when it took a fifth or a case. The tolerance will decrease. Alcohol is the same as a paint thinner. Our esophagus, all of our tubulars, stomach walls, intestines, they're all coated with a protective mucus-like substance. Over time, alcohol will wash away all this protective substance from our tubulars. Therefore, the tubulars are open for irritation, infection, and disease. I've known recovering alcoholics that have said when they went into detox that they were bleeding from every hole in their body. My uncle went into the hospital at the end of his life and had a hole in his esophagus. All of his food was going over to his lung. And back then, several years ago, they tried to cut his stomach out and raise it up to his throat. They're more successful today, but years ago they were not very successful with that operation. And he died within 3 days. When dealing with the active alcoholic or drug addict, their physical condition has to be addressed before you're able to successfully address their spiritual condition. I believe this. It's page 59. Most of us are agnostic. Some of us will agree about anything, especially if we're in detox. But they need to become stable. You need to help them become physically stable and get them into a place where they feel safe. While going through detox, the alcoholic could also go into delirium tremens. Delirium tremens can happen within 10 full days after they stop drinking. And might surprise you, but the only drug that you can die from withdrawal is alcohol. But if they are not hospitalized within 30 minutes, 3 out of 4 will die from detox from alcohol. So it's important you don't just send somebody home by themselves to detox. They do it in a controlled environment, or they're at home, at least home with some loved one that's there with them and can recognize that they're going into a delusional state, and that they can transport them to ER within 30 minutes. So you don't want to just send somebody home that's living by themselves, and you want to warn them at least the first 10 days you can go into delirium tremens. You may feel great the third day, the fourth day, and the sixth day, here it is. And I had a fellow call me one time. He said, "Dennis, it's snowing outside." This was in the middle of the summer, a real hot summer day. He said, snowflakes are falling on my hood of my car. I knew he needed to get to the nearest hospital. We didn't know what's going to come next. Try to get our friends to think in one day at a time. But at first, they may not be able to think one day at a time. Can you do without alcohol for today? I don't know. Can you do it for the next 5 minutes? Well, yeah, I can do it for the next 5 minutes. Well, then just do it for the next 5 minutes. And for the next 10 minutes. And this too shall pass. But eventually we start thinking in one day at a time. Matthew, page 61, Matthew chapter 6, verse 34, "Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." Page 65, the length of time drugs of abuse can be detected in the urine. And it's pretty self-explanatory, but each one of these drugs you see has a different time period for it to be detected in the urine. Page 66. In 2002, I was a plant counselor for the UAW and Chrysler Corporation in Newcastle, Indiana. We had about 1,200 employees, and I serviced all the UAW represented employees and their families. At that time, I had been a counselor for 26 years. Over those 26 years, I had from time to time an employee or a family member that were suicidal. But in 2002, the Newcastle Machining and Forge plant had been put on notice by Chrysler Corporation that they had decided to sell the plant. This plant had been the largest employer in Newcastle, a city of about 2,000, since 1908. We had employees that had had 4 generations of their families work in this plant. I had gone through another plant closing as a plant counselor. But this plant closing was much more terrifying to the employees and to their families. At one point, I had 4 employees that were suicidal. These employees were either a mental health patient or an addiction patient. This put a lot of stress on me as a counselor. I knew the statistics. I was frightened. I prayed for days asking for insight on how I could help these people, other than the psychiatric care, the care that the union and the company were providing. I began to think, one day at a time. Only God could change the desires of our heart. The importance of rigid honesty. We'll never be tempted above what we're able to handle. The importance of communications. So on page 67, I developed this handout to give out to these patients, and I've used it ever since. The 7 basics of survival. Live one day at a time. Each morning, confirm that, yes, I can tolerate today without drinking or using or harming myself. Remember, this too shall pass. 1 Timothy 2, 3 and 5. If I do not desire to change, I should ask the Lord to give me the desire to change the destructive behavior. Rigid honesty. Psalms 139, to thine own self be true. Temptation. 1 Corinthians 10:13. I know that I'll not be tempted above what I'm able to tolerate. Galatians 6. I need to communicate. I need to communicate with my friends and my spouse. I need to talk it out. 1 Corinthians 15. Paul said this same thing. But our peace will come from total acceptance of our personal life limitations. I am what I am, says Popeye the Sailor Man. And like I said, Paul said the same thing in 1 Corinthians 15. When times get tough, the tough get going. Shake it off and step up. 1 Corinthians 11, Paul talks about getting tough and stepping up. You probably heard this before. You have to get them lost before you can get them saved. The Bible verses I associate this with is said by Peter in his command to the Israelites in Acts 2, 36 through 38. He says, therefore, all Israel, be assured of this, God made this Jesus, whom you crucified, both Lord and Christ. When the people heard this, they were cut to the heart and said to Peter and the other apostles, brothers, what shall we do? Peter replied, repent and be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of your sins, and you will receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. Prior to this day, the Israelites had had many excuses to not believe that Jesus Christ was the awaited Messiah. He was an impostor, they said. Matthew would have never been one of his disciples. It was by the prince of demons that he drove out demons. He committed blasphemy toward God. It's better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish. The guards were paid. Their leaders would never lead them astray. If he was truly the Messiah, he would have saved himself. But on this day, their excuses, their alibis were exhausted. They were cut to the heart. I have stated in past lessons, the better job we can do with our assessments, the better our recovery rates. I mentioned the use of multiple assessments, the DSM, screening tools, medical, psychological, social, chronological, addictive, behavioral, disease, and the spiritual biblical perception. Whereas most of us Christian church leaders and ministers, counselors, perform our counseling in a one-on-one setting, it's even more important that we provide multiple assessments. They don't have other people in a group interact with to challenge them about their denial. Remember, alcoholism and drug addiction, they always get worse. It never gets better. Please turn to page 72. Page 72 is a chronological assessment chart. And simply ask for their name, the date, their current age, and their clean date. What was your age when you very first used any kind of a mind-altering drug? How old were you? Many say 12, 13, 14. One told me that his dad gave it beer to him in a bottle when he was an infant. But when was their very first use of alcohol? How old were they when they began social drinking or social use? And the only reason for social use is peer pressure. That's the only reason they drink. They did not drink for relief. They did not use for relief. They did not to relieve stress or to change their mood. They drank or they used only because of peer pressure. Everybody else in the group was using, so they used. How old were they when they had their first blackout or their pass out? And personally, I was 18 years old. I had a blackout for 4 hours. I knew the next day that there were 4 hours that I couldn't recall. I went to my first sergeant at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Our first sergeant was a heavy drinker. He says, son, I drank a fifth of whiskey for the last 20 years, and I have never experienced anything like that. Every day. He said, you're going to the Fort psychologist. So I went to the Fort psychologist. The Fort psychologist gave me one assessment tool. I saw right then that, boy, according to that from Johns Hopkins University, I had a problem, 18 years old. But at that time, the field was young, probably 1961, and he said, you're only 18 years old, just don't drink. He said, there's a couple AA meetings here on post, but they're a bunch of old men, you never fit in, just don't drink. And I regret that he didn't have a follow-up visit, but I drank. He didn't tell me about the next few days, what I might be experiencing. He didn't tell me about this strong pounding voice. I'm going to get drunk, I'm going to get drunk, I'm going to get drunk. Oh no, I can't do that, I'm alcoholic. I drank that one time, and 13 years later, from 4-hour blackout to 2 and 3 day blackouts, and I was sober for 3 months. And I happen to remember that psychologist. I don't ever recall remembering that psychologist sober. I wasn't drunk for 13 years. You know, there's heroin addicts, there's times in between. But at the end of that AA meeting that I remembered that, I went home, my wife, I said, I got to be the craziest guy in the world. I was told this 13 years ago at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And she said, oh yeah, there were times when you were drunk that you would bring up this crazy psychologist at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And I think, wow, I bring that guy up when I'm drunk, but I don't remember that many times I was sober. At relief drinking, and it's just what it is. You're drinking, you had a hard day work, you go to the bar, you go home, you have a couple of beers, that's relief drinking. Here's the difference of this first sergeant drinking a fifth a day. His tolerance never increased. He was a big man, so he had a lot of blood to loot, but he got here at 1/5 a day, which is a lot of alcohol, but he was a big man, and he was drinking that fifth a day, but his tolerance did not increase. But the alcoholic, his tolerance keeps increasing until his physical just really becomes deteriorated, and then it starts decreasing. But a heavy drinker, he stays the same. And that's really unusual, that much. I don't know if he did that or not. But usually you're talking like maybe a person that drinks 6 to 8 beers on the weekends. And that's a heavy drinker. 6 to 8 beers is a lot of beer. Well, but that's a heavy drinker, but they're never progressed to alcoholism because their tolerance level stayed the same. But again, there are some very chronic alcoholics that never black out and have been chronic alcoholics for years, but they never black out. Okay, chronological assessment. Sneak drink or use. Well, how old were they there? Loss of control. As soon as I say loss of control, they identify with me. They say, oh, I was 24 years old. I lost control. And I don't have to explain nothing. They just know that at 24 years old, something different happened, that they did not have the control that they had prior to. Financial problems, how old were they? Eye openers. That's having a drink or a fix the next morning. Actually, they're going through withdrawal, so they're fighting off withdrawal with another drink or another fix. Change of pattern. They recognize something's wrong. It doesn't really be conscious to them, but I gotta cut back. I gotta start just drinking beer only, or I just want to start drinking. I'm just going to start using at home. I'm going to, in some way, there's a change in pattern, and they may not even recognize that something's wrong, but you talk about it, they recognize that. Oh yeah, a few years ago, I decided that I was only going to use at home, and there was a change in pattern. And that's an indicator that, hey, something was wrong back then. Prolonged binges. A binge is 5 drinks or more in a given time, or 5 or more drinks during the month. 5 or drinks at a given time and more than 5 times a month. That's what we call binge drinking. And once a person starts drinking 5 drinks, that much, 4 or 5 drinks, and they drink another 4 or 5, and they 5 times a month, it'll go to 6 drinks, it'll go 6 times a month. It'll go 7 drinks 7 times a month, or it'll become more often, and eventually they'll be drinking constantly. Withdrawals, and you get the age of all these here. Okay, at the bottom, we talked about alibis being exhausted. Alibis exhausted until the drug addict, the alcoholic, comes to a point in their life that their alibis are exhausted. They will continue to drink. All excuses for drinking or using. It's my birthday. It's our anniversary. I had a bad day. Until you come to a point in your life and you say, hey, I don't care what happens to me. I don't care if I walk through that door and a ton of bricks fall on my head. I'm not drinking. I'm not drugging. I don't care what happens to me. I'm not going to have a drink. I'm not going to use. Until you come to a point that your alibis are exhausted, a person will continue to use. I asked for their age, that they came to that point. Many say, I haven't come to that point. And I ask them, be honest with me. I haven't come to that point. And I ask them about, now remember, this is Christian Counseling and Addiction Services. So people that are coming to us chose Christian Counseling and Addiction Services. I ask them about surrender to God. Oh, I surrendered to God when I was 12. I surrendered to God 2 years ago. They surrendered to God. Okay, I put their age there. But alibis exhausted, they haven't got there yet. I don't care how many times they surrendered to God. If their alibis are not exhausted, they will drink again. And I let them know that. But here's the main thing about this chronological assessment chart. You got the age of their first use, their social use, their relief drinking or relief use, sneak drinking, loss of control, eye openers, withdrawals. They're different ages. And these ages, each individual, they can look at their own chronological assessment and say, hey, look, this thing is progressive. This disease is progressive. It's going to get worse. It's not going to get better. Page 75 is the Jellinek chart. Dr. Jellinek in the 1940s was a contributor to the recognition of the disease model of alcoholism by the World Health Organization and the American Medical Association in the 1950s. The disease model should never be used to justify a person's drunkenness or being drugged or adverse related behavior. Too often I have noticed clients using the disease model to justify some of their character defects. I've heard some say, that's just part of my disease, when referring to a personal defect of character. The disease model of alcoholism and drug addiction should always be defined as a responsible disease, and the defects of character should be properly dealt with by using the 12 steps in a 12-step program. The alcoholic or drug addict is responsible to follow through with their personal recovery plan the same way that anyone with any other disease is responsible to follow through with their recovery follow-up visits to their physician or treatment or therapy, physical therapy, medications. Same with anyone else with a disease needs to follow through with their treatment plan. The alcoholic should too, or the addict. The recovery plan usually involves intense professional addiction counseling, therapy, meeting regularly with other recovering addicts, and in some cases, being compliant with medications, such as antabuse. When I first went to Alcoholics Anonymous, I heard, "You have a disease, and it kills. This is a deadly disease. Keep drinking, and it'll get worse. So-and-so died last week or last month because of their drinking or drugging." In later years, I've been saddened to attend many funerals of relapsed recovering addicts, year after year after year after year. I cannot remember how many people I've witnessed dying because of this terrible disease. Believe me, alcoholism, drug addiction kills. In using the Jellinek chart, page 75, and properly explaining the disease model, the client can recognize the progression of the disease or the disorder in their own life and the predictable outcome if they continue to use. You can use this and pass it out to your clients and have them circle each item that they identify with in this progression chart. Remember, at the end of this session, you've been talking about drinking and drugging and everything. A session like that, remember, deactivate cravings at the end of the session. Either relaxation therapy, deep breathing, prayer, remind them of the coping skills. But the Jellinek chart, page 75, occasional relief drinking, then constant relief drinking commences. Onset of memory blackouts, increased dependence on alcohol, feelings of guilt, effects to control, fail, so on and so forth. Finally, complete defeat is admitted, and there's obsessive drinking or drugging and continues in vicious circles. Then there's a prognosis. This is the symptoms of the disease from Dr. Jellinek's curve. This to the right is the prognosis of recovery. There's an honest desire for help. They learn that they have an illness. They're told that addiction can be arrested. They meet with former addicts. They're normal and they're happy. They have an onset of new hope. Realistic thinking starts. Rebirth of new ideas. Creative thinking begins. When I present this Jellinek chart, I always make sure that I can present it in the very same session and have enough time to present the prodigal son along with it. And on page 77, you can see the prodigal son curve. Verse 12, give me my share, self-will. Verse 13, selfishness. He got together all he had. Verse 13, there was separation, a distant country. Verse 13, sensuality. He squandered all in wild living. Verse 14, poverty. There was a severe famine. Verse 15, abandonment. Verse 16, starvation. Verse 17, awareness. He came to his senses. Verse 18, I will set out and go back to my father. Verse 18, continued repentance. Verse 20, action, humility. Verse 22, he was cleansed. Verse 23, 24, joy. So there's a model here of in the same way there is with the Jellinek chart. Another good publication on denial, and you'll have to Google it, but it's called a merry-go-round named Denial, and it's a really good publication on the topic of denial. Phases of recovery. Recovery from drug addiction is a process of growth and development that involves the whole person. It takes time, and not only attitude changes, but lifestyle changes as well. A lot of people say, I got this, I got that. You say, oh, wow, great. Oh, he's got it. It involves lifestyle changes. We have defined here in the phases of recovery, page 85, 4 phases of recovery. There's a bottoming out phase, there's an ambivalent phase, there's a commitment phase. In the commitment phase, there's now the people begin to act on their ideas about recovery. Patterns of drug-free living emerge, and gradually things start to go right. And then 4th, there's the integration stage. This phase describes recovering addicts in their new lifestyle. It is really just another name for the universal process of finding one's place in the world. Page 86. Page 86 is a worksheet that goes along with this exercise. And you give this worksheet to your client, your patient, and you see there's 4 columns. There's a bottoming out column, there's a column on ambivalence, there's a column on commitment, and there's a column on integration. Down in the lower left-hand corner of the form, it says put a P. If it's something in the past, put a P in this space. It's something I've dealt with. I've done this, and it's over. If it's something that you're now working that you're dealing with, and you're still working on this issue, then put an N. So example, bottoming out stage, the very first one. Until now you have lived only for the moment and not faced reality. And hopefully they'd say, that's something I've dealt with. Yes, because by this time that you're using this form, they've been in your treatment program for a while. And they put a P. Is sick and tired of the hassles, cannot continue this way. A P. Feels hopeless and confused about where to turn. They may still feel that way. That's something I'm still working on. It's an N. Ask honestly for help. And maybe a P. Begins to share personal feelings with a positive, supportive person. Well, if they're talking to you, surely a P. The ambivalent stage acknowledges that drug-free lifestyles would be better, but doubts personal strength and cannot imagine self as a drug-free person. Could very easily be an N, something that they're still dealing with. Under commitment stage, cuts off relationships with user friends for good. Cut them off for good. Maybe it's something they're still dealing with now, in. Commitment stage, develops new meanings of coping with stress and physical pain. Hopefully by this time you've talked about coping skills and things. And so maybe a P even over into the commitment stage. And they're still dealing with some issues over in the ambivalent stage, or even in the bottoming out stage. Integration stage, without forgetting the past, feels like a drug-free person and a part of the recovering community. And probably not. If they've just been clean for a few months, probably not going to feel like a drug-free person completely and a part of a drug-free, a recovering community. So put an end. Helping others becomes an essential part of life. And hopefully, and then I use this, I don't just use this one time. Once I get to this part of my treatment, then I put this in their file, and then a couple months later, we want to refer back to this and do it again and see if they have progressed in these stages of recovery, from bottoming out, ambivalence, commitment, integration. Page 87, the activation of cravings. Whereas relapse is common among substance abusers, the recovering person needs to have a well-rehearsed relapse plan. Relapse not necessary and should be discouraged with fear and trembling. Many recovering persons never come back to recovery after they relapse. They're too ashamed. I don't know what keeps them away, but they come to the program and they relapse. But it's normal. Relapse is normal. Most of us do. But have a plan. What are you going to do if it happens? Page 88, Principles of Deactivation of Cravings. This material is from NIDA, National Institute of Drug Abuse. And let me tell you, they don't put something out unless there's tons of research that go behind it. And Principles of Deactivation of Cravings. Cravings can be stimulated or triggered automatically if a recovering person experiences certain situations that were strongly associated with patterns from former drug use. Complete absence. And it's not just me saying this. NIDA, National Institute of Drug Abuse. Complete absence, which means not using mind-altering drugs at all, is the surest and quickest way to reduce cravings. A lot of opiate addicts in our churches, they're saying, well, alcohol was never a problem with me. I can still drink. I can still drink alcohol. It is the surest and quickest way to reduce cravings. Total absence from all mind-altering drugs. It's not just me saying that. NIDA. Okay. What's NIDA say about willpower? Not quite what I say about willpower, but they recognize willpower is not a really good defense mechanism. Determination and willpower are poor defenses against cravings. Changing your lifestyle to gain friends and support, to learn new ways to relax and have fun. So they're talking about changing your lifestyle, not just willpower. You might relapse. If that happens, get back on the recovery road immediately. And at the bottom of the worksheet, these points up above are all from NIDA. I added these few comments here at the bottom and lines. My continued sobriety plan is. What do they plan to do to continue their sobriety? And write it out. I want them to write it out. What do you plan to do? My dangerous situations are. Where are the places that you know you're going to be in danger? Write it out. My relapse plan is I want them to write it out, and I want it to know exactly what they have committed to doing if they were to relapse. Page 89, National Alliance on Mental Health, Family to Family. It's NAMI, N-A-M-I. It's a great organization. This Letting Go handout on the next page is one of the materials from NIDA, or NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Health, Family to Family organization. And it's just one of the handouts that they use. I went through it twice. It's a 12-week course with NAMI on teaching about mental illness for family members who have family with mental health issues. And it's a great program and really good material. And you'll end up with more material from NAMI than you did from me. It is really good. Page 91. 5 depressing events. It's formed on page 92. The purpose of using this form is to explore how the client has coped in the past with depressing issues. Has their coping method worked? In what ways has it not worked? In what ways has it worked? Should they continue to use these methods, or should they modify these methods? This exercise may prompt you to suspect that the client is clinically depressed again. Again, the second page following the depression screening is the depression screening that we talked about earlier briefly. Please remember, if the client or family member scores below 18, no medication is likely needed. A score between 19 and 39 indicates that the individual may need to be on medication. Therefore, you need to refer them to a psychiatrist for further evaluation. A score of 40 or above indicates that they may need to be hospitalized for depression. With a score of 40 or above, or if your client shows signs of suicide, insist that your client go to the nearest emergency room for a psychiatric evaluation immediately. If your client has made a suicidal plan, destroy it. Remove guns, remove medications, or any other items from their person or home, and make arrangements for the client to go to the nearest emergency room. Page 92. The list of 5 depressing, life-changing events. These are events that have happened in the past that were depressing, and let them write down what those were. Maybe there weren't 5, maybe there were just 3 or 4, but write them down, and then ask them, how did they cope? They coped by doing so and so. What did they use to cope during that time? And then discuss it. Did those coping skills work? So forth. If you suspect that there is an issue with depression still lingering, the form on page 93 is what I was referring to. And you just simply go through sad or depressed mood. Do you experience a sad or depressed mood either not at all, or at times, or regularly, or most of the time? And each one has a 0, 1, 2, 3 as far as a number for your scoring. As they go through this, feelings of guilt, they say, well, most of the time I feel guilty. Or irritable mood, well, regularly, so they circle a 2. See myself as worthless, maybe a 1 or a 2. Trouble concentrating, maybe a 2. suicidal thoughts. If they say most of the time we're in trouble, we, and there's 19 different issues here that they might identify with, and you come with a score. If the score is 0 to 18, they're likely to not need medication for their mental health or for their depression. But if their score is 19 to 39, medication may be needed. If it's 40 or more, then probably that person probably needs to be hospitalized immediately. Page 94, serenity. If I was to take any credit for this achievement, I would have to say that I never gave up. My intense study, my passion, and my prayer for myself were unwavering. Serenity, reality, they're all on the same plane. The main reason the addict uses is to escape reality. The Word of God is truth and peace and reality. Let me explain. Here's a line of serenity. Time is in this direction. Boy, we are serene. Day one, a year later. But that's not life. Life has their ups and their downs. Above this line, anxiety. Below this line is depression. For every up, there's a down. Let me first start out with chemicals, talking about chemicals. Okay, and I'll talk about alcohol and opiates being a depressant drug. And sure, you start using, and then there is this euphoria. And then you start coming down. And you come down, and then you go to detox, and you get clean. You don't go up here and say, oh, wow, I'm serene. No. For every low, there's a high emotionally. They go way up above this line, and they're anxious. I go to the hospital after a person has been in for 3 weeks usually, and I sit down with their counselor. I go over their treatment plan that they've negotiated in the hospital, and I ask them, how you doing? They say, man, I'm doing great. I feel better than I ever felt in my life. Well, they feel different. They feel wonderful. They're way up here. And they may be up here for months before they start coming down and start touching base with reality. And I warn them. Look, here's 3 months, 6 months. I'm not sure when it's going to be. But at some point, you're going to touch base with reality. And once you do, that's where I lose them. That's where I lose my patients at 3 to 6 months out. Why did we use? We used to escape reality. And once we start dealing with reality, that's the time that we need to have. By that time, we really need to be fixed into our treatment process. Okay. Here's anxiety. Here's depression. Here's stress. Here's stress here. Stress can come anywhere. I hope you get the idea. One more thing. Cocaine and methamphetamines. Stimulants. They're up here. They stop using. They don't come here. They crash. That's what we talk about, crash. And so they go to the treatment center, and they're dealing with depression maybe for months after they've been clean. But you go to a treatment center, what do? They don't put them to bed like the alcoholic or the opiate addict. They take them to the gym. They take them to the gym, and they start working out, trying to fight off this natural response to detox from a stimulant. Page 96, relaxation. I learned many years ago there's nothing wrong with mind control. A matter of fact, one of the 9 fruits of the Spirit is self-control. One constructive exercise I was taught was to not allow any thoughts to come into my mind. And when the first thought comes into your mind, simply close the exercise by saying, "Thine will be done." At first, you may only be able to go a couple of seconds. But with practice, you may be able to hold the retention of any thoughts for up to a full minute. This is called thought stopping. Let us stop now and practice thought stopping. Don't allow any thoughts to come into your mind. Keep practicing it 2 or 3 times a day. Eventually, you may just get 1 second. You may just get 2 seconds. Keep practicing thought stopping for 1, 2 or 3 times a day from now on. And eventually, you'll be able to do it for 15 seconds, maybe 17 seconds. Thine will be done. Just close it with thine will be done. 1975, I was in a psychological class at Indiana University in Indianapolis. The instructor was a young doctorate student graduate from Indiana University in Bloomington. Early in the class, one of the students had asked this young lady, "What about God?" She responded, "If there is a God." This was not the first time that I'd heard a college professor from a state-sponsored school being disrespectful to God. It's too bad. During one of our classes, this young lady brought a cassette player to class. It had been altered to respond to brain activity. The machine would make an irregular, high-pitched screeching sound if the patient's brain waves were irregular and not at rest. If the patient's brain waves were at rest, the machine would respond with a loud, low bass sound. The professor asked for a volunteer. The student in front of me raised their hand immediately. The professor attached the electrodes to the student's head, told the student to relax. Immediately, the machine began to screech. The professor stopped the exercise, and she asked, "Is there for another volunteer?" She asked if anybody here that has an experience with relaxation therapy or transcendental meditation. I had not had any experience with transcendental meditation, but I had had some relaxation therapy classes in workshops sponsored by the Indiana Counselors Association on Alcohol and Drug Abuse. I thought surely someone else would raise their hand and volunteer, but they didn't. So I reluctantly raised my hand and volunteered. The professor attached electrodes to my head and asked me to relax. Although I had had some training in relaxation therapy, I'd not really practiced this activity regularly, but I had been praying in accordance with Romans chapter 8, verse 26, nearly every night at bedtime for several months. Romans 8:26, it says, in the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray, but the Spirit Himself intercedes for us. So when she asked me to relax, I began to pray in my weakness, asking God to intercede in my thoughts. Immediately, I began to doze, and I fell asleep. Just before I fell asleep, I heard this machine making this loud, very low sound, and I was out. I don't know how long I was out, but the next thing I knew, the professor, she was shaking me, and she asked me, what did you do? Well, in my drowsiness, I said, I yielded my mind to God. Remember, this is a lady that had said, if there is a God. And but she immediately said, class dismissed. Time for break. Same thing here. Class dismissed. Time for break. End of session 2. Thank you.